Well, the most common lawsuit is like a slip and fall. Do you have a porch? Do you have a driveway? Do you have somewhere where they can trip? Do you have a rug? Those are the most common lawsuits. So even if you don't have those other amenities, I think it's important that you have a rental agreement and that you're maintaining your property.
Welcome to this episode of Branded and Booked. I am joined today by one of my all-time favorite people in this short-term rental industry. And when you guys hear who she is, you might be surprised by that because I feel like all of us shy away from the legal side. It's like we forget that we're building these businesses with massive liabilities. And this is probably one of the most, I would say, potentially one of the most neglected pieces, but literally the most crucial piece of creating and building your business and making sure that you have all of the right support from a legal perspective. So I'm joined today by Katie Johnson. Like I said, she's one of my favorite people. She's a client of mine. I'm a client of hers. It's really great. So Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steph. I'm so happy to be here. You're one of my favorite people too. We could
Oh,
chat for hours, I'm sure.
you're so kind. I appreciate you. Why don't you give everyone a little introduction to you and who you are, and then let's dive in.
Yes, for sure. So my name's Katie Johnson. I'm a host and also an attorney. So I've been a host since 2015 and I've been an attorney since 2011, so about 15 years. So I'm married to you and I specialize in short-term rental law and really helping short-term investors that they're legally compliant.
Which is so crucial and so important. So, I want to start our conversation off today, Katie, because I think you have a really unique perspective in this space, being that you are a short term rental owner. Obviously, you have the legal side, right? Which is amazing, but you are also an owner. You are also a co host. And so you operate within the space just like the rest of us do. And I think that offers such a unique opportunity for you as a lawyer to go, here are the things that people are forgetting or missing. And that's actually where I want to start. When we decide to become short term rental owners, we open ourselves up to a lot of different liabilities. And if we are not making sure to take the steps necessary to protect ourselves and also our guests and our properties, etc., bad things can happen. So I would love for you to share maybe three of the most common mistakes. And let's talk first about like short-term rental owners, but like purchasing their own properties or starting to own and then operate themselves. Then we can talk a little bit about the co-hosting side too.
Yeah, for sure. So I think like the three biggest mistakes are probably no entity set up, like no LLC, no insurance or bad insurance, and then no rental agreement.
Okay.
So those are
Yeah.
like three
Three.
really basic things, but often see these things
Yes,
not happening.
yes, yes. On the LLC side, I want you to dive into each of those a little bit more because on the entity setup, I think this is something that we don't talk a lot about. And for me, there's a little bit of confusion around, okay, well, if I have an LLC, do I have to transfer my home into that LLC? What's involved in that process? Like what am I really getting into there?
Yeah. So you do. I'd say because sometimes that's the mistake I see is people set up an LLC, but then they don't transfer the home into the LLC. So it's really not giving you the protection that you think it is if the asset itself is not in the LLC. Like, so for example, let's just go worst case scenario. If something really tragic happens at that property, someone is seriously harmed or injured or even dies, and your home is not in that LLC, now all of your assets are subject to that lawsuit, right? Because you're operating under your personal name in that scenario, including like, any 401ks, savings. You might have to go through a bankruptcy process if your insurance doesn't cover all the way. And I talk about this on my podcast, STR Law. There was like a $11.6 million verdict in this space a few years ago. And that person had their house in their personal name, not an LLC. And you can only imagine that they would have had to, potentially declare bankruptcy after that in some capacity because their house and their personal assets were not separated. Um, so the benefit of the having it separated and you have the house in the LLC is if something happens, then your liability, if set up properly, is limited to that asset itself, the house.
My gosh. Yeah. Okay. And mistake number two was not the proper insurance or no insurance, which is terrifying. So, what do you see there?
Yeah. So what I see is folks potentially having insurance, but not being honest with their insurance company, because a lot of people buy these houses as like a second home loan or whatever. So they're trying to be coy with their insurance company and how they're using the home, but they're really using them as like a short-term rental. And the way they're using them is they have additional amenities there, like kayaks or golf carts or boats or something like that. And they don't disclose this to their insurance company thinking they're getting away with something by doing that, but in reality they're just like going to lead themselves to a denied claim, right? So what I think is really important is just really going through your insurance policy, seeing what's on there, and if something's not on there, asking for like a rider, and if they can provide one. Like, so if you have insurance that doesn't have, kayak coverage or whatever the coverage might be, say like, hey, like I'm offering these amenities, can you cover it? And if they say no, hey, can I have a rider? If they say no to that, then look for a different insurance company because there are insurance companies that will cover that. But that those are sort of mistakes I have seen. Or even like no insurance, for example, if like you have an event at your house, you're not necessarily going to automatically be insured for an event. So if you're going to offer events in any sort of capacity, because I see people asking about this all the time on Facebook groups, you want to make sure that you're going to be covered in that scenario. And it's just like a real quick call to your insurance company. But they love denying claims. So you just really want to make sure you have everything in writing, that your policy is good. Don't, it's kind of like real estate broker agents and stuff like that. Trust but verify. Like if your agent, your insurance agent saying, yeah, you're covered. Okay, verify that and look in your coverage and make sure you're actually covered.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then the third mistake was rental agreements.
Yeah, a lot of people don't use them. So is what I've heard and learned. And actually as like a casual, user of Airbnb myself, like I stay at Airbnbs, I'm not signing rental agreements most of the time when I stay there. I think it's helpful just to have that it's a legal document that you'd have with a guest, just have all those expectations in writing, what your cancellation policies are, putting like no chargebacks in there and things like that. What's going to happen if they damage something? And then, of course, an indemnification clause, having them hold you harmless for anything other than, of course, can't like be held harmless for gross negligence, but, just having those really solid agreements. And so what goes hand in hand with a rental agreement is like safety and compliance and making sure you have safety inspections and things like that, just to make sure that your rental is safe and compliant and ready to be offered to the public.
Yeah, you and Justin Ford are BFFs in this space, which I love so much and I think is very fun. I listened to you speak, obviously, at a conference recently, and then also listened to Justin speak at a conference recently. And I was like, why did I get into this industry? It's terrifying. On the rental agreement side of things, Katie, a question that I had for you. I hear, and I've even had this mentality. Well, the property doesn't have a hot tub, it doesn't have a deck, it doesn't like there's nothing there for people to have a liability around. Like it's fine. So do I really need to create another barrier to entry for people to have to sign a rental agreement? And I'd love to know your response to that.
Well, the most common lawsuit is like a slip and fall. Do you have a porch? Do you have a driveway? Do you have somewhere where they can trip? Do you have a rug? Those are the most common lawsuits. So even if you don't have those other amenities, I think it's important that you have a rental agreement and that you're maintaining your property and making sure that it is, ready for guests to enter. And then the second, from the like, not establishing like a tenant relationship. So I call mine a license agreement, not a rental agreement. I say we're creating a license with the guests for these shorter stays. And then I also have some provisions in there about, hey, you hold over, we're going to start charging you $50 an hour. You hold over, we're going to tow your car. You hold over, we're going to kick you out, just to really be clear and set that expectation that they need to leave. I did that after actually I had a client who they did have a holdover situation. And so we really wanted to be that. So, these things are evolving documents. Once you have something happen, you might add a clause to it, right? I found that most people sign them like no problem. And then the people who don't, I don't even think I hear from them. I think they just like cancel right away, but I haven't seen a huge uptick in cancellations or anything since I started implementing them myself.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, again, it just comes back to you taking ownership for number one, like the safety of your guests and also protection of you. But in addition to that, you coming from the perspective of we are a professional host. We take this seriously. It's not just a house we've thrown on Airbnb. And I think that creates a level of professionalism that, in my opinion, can help attract better guests as well, and guests who are not as likely to cause chaos at your home.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm like, cancel, please. A party policy in there and you have like 8 guests and for 2 nights or something really quick and you want to cancel, by all means, please go ahead.
Please.
I agree. I think if and then it's if people are going to be complainers or worried, and they're going to cancel, I'm happy with them canceling. So it really just sets that tone. I send it out in the first message to them. So they
Yeah.
book immediately, they get my rental agreement you need to sign. And then in my house rules, I say you must sign my rental agreement. So that's something. So if they refuse to sign and I want to cancel, then under Airbnb's policy and VRBO's policy, since I disclosed it in advance that they have to sign the rental agreement, I should be able to cancel for without penalty. I haven't had that situation come up yet for myself, but if someone like is trying to push and stay there and say I don't want to sign this, but I still want to stay there, I haven't had that situation.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
in
Okay.
theory, you could cancel.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think a lot of people in this space are also, they fall under like the co-hosting side of things, or they're co-hosting or property management and so forth. So when we shift from, yes, owner and operator, great. But then there's also this relationship of I'm the co-host and I am managing guests for a client and I'm managing their home and I'm talking to the client and all the things, that's a whole different ball game as well. So I'd love for you to just kind of share any legal insights for anyone who's listening to this who is co-hosting or managing that they really need to make sure that they've got dialed in, and that they're focused on when it comes to protecting themselves legally and managing other people's homes.
Well, I think it's mostly all the same things, except for, they're going to want to have a contract with the person that they're managing for or co-hosting for. They're going to want to make sure they're named on that person's insurance policy as well. And don't just put it in your contract. Require like a compliance a year, require proof of their insurance that you are additionally named insured. And it shouldn't really cost them any extra money either. Yourself, you'll probably want to get your own insurance, general liability, so errors and omissions. And then you'll also just want to make sure if you're property managing that you have these compliance and safety checks in place, and that you're just, you have some sort of documentation of it so that, if something happened, it's not that you were negligent. It was that it was a freak accident and, unpreventable.
Yeah, absolutely. Katie, what do you do on the like compliance and safety side of things for your properties? Because you own and you co-host, and I'm so curious what processes you might have in place that I feel like I need to get Justin Ford on the podcast too, but I'm just curious from your perspective of being on the legal side. Okay, great. Well, these are the things that we're making sure we're doing to stay compliant and avoid any kind of gross negligence situation.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely get Justin on the podcast for sure. He's definitely an expert in this space, but I use Breezeway, which is what Justin promotes. So they have like safety checklists in their app that you can use, and they have them quarterly, yearly, and all of that. And then also he has that safety course that helps you understand what you might want. I also like love when a town is regulated
Mm,
because you will have the fire inspector come and they will inspect your home and make sure it's like compliant. Like for example, we have a couple homes that are not in a regulated zone, so we didn't have that happen. But then after I had my safety inspection with my fire inspector, I was like, oh, yeah, we should have the grill like 12 feet or 15 feet from the home. That makes sense. And then I see like fires, in other groups from like grill fires from like the grill being too close to the home. So just like common sense safety stuff like that. I like signs, safety signs, like for your hot tub, pool, whatever you have, just common sense safety signs. Um, that sort of thing are the ways I try to make my house safer and compliant.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's so good. So then as I was listening to Justin speak at this conference, I was like, man, I feel like I need a whole fire safety sign. Like, just here's what to do in the event of a fire, and here's where things are, and make sure I don't know. I was just really trying to brainstorm, especially at our cabins. We've got the charcoal grills and we've got fire pits and all of these things that now I just see as, yes, they're fun and they're a great experience, but scary.
I know. When I started, my dad's an attorney too. So he's been an attorney for 40 plus years. And he's like, I wouldn't have a fire pit. Don't have a fire pit, Katie. Like he's like very much so like more risk averse, And so, we do have fire pits, but just I think I saw recently, I think Justin posted like a picture of like a fire bucket, right? So you could
Yeah.
do that potentially. have signs, make sure fire is extinguished, all of that. And then also making sure that there's like some sort of barrier on it, like, because you don't want people falling in the fire either,
Yeah,
like kids and
absolutely.
stuff.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Okay, as we shift from the STR and co-hosting side, so many in this industry are also exploring what it looks like to do boutique hotels or glamp sites or micro resorts, etc. And getting into that space myself opened up an entirely different can of legal worms. And so I am really curious on that side what mistakes you see there, what advice you have for anyone who's thinking, okay, yes, I want to get into this. Great, but don't forget about this side of the legal piece too.
Yeah. So luckily in the hotel motel space, I believe you're going to be subject to a lot more inspections and stuff like that from local municipalities because there's a lot more regulation there. So that's helpful just from like the safety compliance standards, making sure you actually have smoke alarms. I mean, just basic stuff, right? But I think it's utmost important there too to have these regular compliance checks to make sure that everything's operating correctly, that your smoke alarms are working, your carbon dioxide alarms, all of that, and then also that you're properly insured, of course, as well. You're going to have so many more people coming in the door when you have a hotel motel than you would have at a short-term rental potentially, right? Because you just have you have multiple units, depending on how big it is, the volume's going to be more there. So when there's more volume, there's just more likelihood that something could happen, right? So I think that's really important to emphasize, all those other things we talked to about short-term rentals apply here. And then from the investment standpoint, there's also other things you're going to want to look out for if you're investing with like other people and things like that.
Yeah. So, like, for example, we invested with three other couples and we have an operating agreement. And I think this is something that if you are getting into a partnership, literally do this day one of the partnership and figure out what that operating agreement's going to look like and who's working with who and who's responsible for what and what happens if someone dies and all of those things. Can you speak more on the operating agreement side of things? And then I want to also ask you about capital raising.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Operating agreement, absolutely so important to have. I mean, I have a client right now who doesn't have one and who has a partner and it's gone messy. And it's just, it'd be just so much smoother if we had an operating agreement saying like exactly how it was supposed to go down if they wanted to break up. I kind of think of it as like a prenup for a business. It really sets up like the tone of the relationship, what decisions need to go by who. Is it going to be member managed or manager managed? All these different scenarios happen in an operating agreement. What happens if someone gets divorced? Does that mean they have to sell their share? What does that look like? What happens if someone dies? What happens if someone's on disability now? What happens? All sorts of different scenarios you want to have laid out in your operating agreement. What about disputes? Like, how are you going to resolve those? I've seen coin toss, I've seen prayer, I've seen mediation, so there's all sorts of different creative things. I love drafting operating agreements because they're all different. It's unique. It's not like, all the same. And it's fun. Those are really fun to craft. So it kind of depends. Someone recently asked me too, like, why would I do an set up an LLC and have an operating agreement versus just like a joint venture agreement? I personally think operating agreement LLC is the safer one because you have that extra layer of protection. Like, so that would be the reason why for that. Mm-hmm.
And many of us are also capital raising in some capacity in this space. So, what are the things that we're not thinking about? For example, we're looking at our next deal, and I'm like, oh, I can go and share on Instagram and on Facebook and in my email list and all the things. And everyone was like, hang on, let's talk about like all the legal implications, right? So, I would love for you to speak to that piece too.
Yeah. So I'm not a securities lawyer, so I'm just gonna caveat that I would definitely refer that out if someone wanted to do like a securities thing. So securities law will come into play when you are publicly trying to elicit funds from people. So that's when, you might, if you're, doing like an email blast to people saying like, hey, I have this opportunity. Does anyone want to invest with me? Securities law is definitely going to kick in, and you're probably going to have to file something with the SEC, whether there's an exemption for it or not. Like if you're only soliciting from accredited investors, so people who make, I think it's above 200,000 for an individual, 300,000 for a couple, would be an accredited investor. And, there might be some exemptions where you can file like a Reg D filing or something like that. But definitely you're going to want to make sure that you're good to go with securities laws, because when you're soliciting money from other people, you want to make sure you're disclosing the risk, all of that. Just because if something were to go wrong, then, they could potentially come back at you and say, hey, you actually didn't raise this capital right. And now you're in all sorts of trouble for that. So you just want to be really careful when you're raising capital, particularly from strangers. Friends and family is more like, a casual operating agreement is fine, that sort of thing. There's not the same securities laws if it's just your close friends and families, but it's when you're kind of going to strangers where the securities laws are going to kick in. So yeah, you were advised right by your whoever told you, wait, hold on, don't do that yet. You're going to want to make sure you have all the right disclaimers in there, and compliance with different securities laws if you are going to go that capital raising route.
Yeah, that's things that we don't all think about all the time. I love it. I love it. Katie, is there anything I didn't ask you today that you think is important for people to hear or know about when they're getting into this space, or when they're in this space and they're like, I'm listening to this podcast and I've done none of the things? Where do they go from here?
Yeah, I mean, definitely more stuff out there for sure. I feel like I'm trying to think. Other common things I see too is folks not having like terms and conditions or privacy policies on their website.
Hmm.
That's super easy to add. But you could get in these sort of like ambulance chaser lawsuits. I call them ambulance chasers because there's these people out in California who will, send you like a demand letter that say, hey, your website doesn't comply with California privacy laws. And then, demand $5,000 per day because your website doesn't comply with it. And if you're like, you have this short-term rental where you're offering a stay in California, then their laws are going to be, to California residents, then their laws are going to apply. Anyway, they're kind of like hostage letters. So that would be a mistake I also see from people, uh, you know, all sorts of other things. But basically, long story short, just find an attorney, have them help you, make sure you're legally protected. It may, cost a little more upfront, or, but in the long run, you're going to save a lot of money.
And a lot of stress and headaches and all the things. Yes, it's so true. Katie, this was such a good conversation. I would love for you to share where everyone can find you and come hang out with you, and tell us about your template shop too, because you have one of these now.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah. So I am on Instagram at STR Law dot with Katie. So I think STR Law dot with dot Katie. And then I also have my website, strlaw.com. And I have a legal template shop where I sell uh, various legal templates, including terms and conditions, privacy policy, rental agreements, co-host agreement, property management agreements, influencer agreements, just independent contractor agreements, all the sort of things that short-term rental investors might need. Yeah, so you can access those there. And I also have the podcast STR Law if people want to tune into that. But really, really enjoyed having this conversation with you, Steph. And if people have more questions, feel free to reach out. I'm very approachable. I'm happy to, do a quick consult. Those are always complimentary. So if anyone wants help, just feel free to reach out.
Katie is seriously one of the most approachable and also most responsive. I can't tell you guys how many lawyers I've worked with in the past that are just like, leave me on unread, don't respond to me. And then I'm like, I need help, like SOS. And Katie is not going to leave you hanging, which I love about her. So definitely reach out if you guys have questions. Katie, thank you so much for this super insightful and really important conversation that's not necessarily, I'm always like, I am so thankful that I'm in the branding and marketing side because it's super sexy and it's very fun. And the law side is not always that way, but oh my gosh, it should be. And it's so important. So don't neglect it, you guys.
Thank you, Steph.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right. Cheers, everyone. We'll see you on the next episode.